Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about living the life you choose on your terms. Today is Wednesday, March 20th, 2024, and this is episode 884 of Living Free in Tennessee. And I am coming to you without any notes at all today. As you can, even my sign's a little crooked in the background. It's a Wednesday interview show, and I think you're going to really like today's show. But like right before this, about an hour and a half ago, we went up into the pasture and we had a second set of triplet lambs. And the first set of triplet lambs, one of them has been rejected by her mom, probably because she doesn't have enough milk. So we are now learning how to bottle feed a lamb. And we finally got everything we needed in one place right before this show. So Matt, who's going to be on, was kind enough to be okay with me starting a little bit late. So what we're going to talk today about with Matt Williams from Knightsbridge is open source intelligence techniques. And he sent me questions. I may or may not ask his questions, but I'm super interested in this because it can be very, very hard to cut through the noise that is the mainstream media news. Like there's a spin on everything. How do you see through all of that? How do you get real information? What do you need to know? He's also a homesteader, so I think you're going to really like that. We'll bring him on in a second. Before I do that, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show. Our featured event of today's show is the Self-Reliance Voices Lessons from Legends, which is a free webinar series every night until Thursday this week from 7 to 8:30-ish p.m. If you want to sign up for that, go to selfreliancefestival.com/webinar and get signed up. I did get an email today from somebody who's like, I can't find the replays. And their email was nowhere in our registration. I'm not sure if they had signed up with a different email or what. But what will happen is you're going to get emails that tell you the link for the webinar. I have been streaming them to the YouTube as well. But to participate in the giveaways, you need to be on the Zoom meeting, which to do that, you register. Now, what I'm going to do with your information after that, full transparency, is ask you if you want to stay on the Self-Reliance Festival email list. And if you say no, I'm taking you off. And then next time we do the webinar series, you'll end up back on there during the webinar series so that we can communicate with you about the Zoom meeting starting and that sort of thing. But what I won't do is leave you on the list if you don't want to be on that list. We send in between festivals, we send an email every couple of weeks and then weekly going up to the Self-Reliance Festival. I just wanted you to know that going in so that you're not surprised, but also know that I'm not just going to keep you on the list without asking for it. That's selfreliancefestival.com/webinar. Tonight we have No One Is Coming to Save You with John Willis. And we have a pretty epic freebie giveaway because he has donated some SOE equipment for us to give away. I was thinking like a toiletry item or something, toiletry bag or something, but no, he went big just like John Willis always does. So you're going to want to not miss that one. I also want to thank our two sponsors of today's show. Our first sponsor is EMP Shield. EMP Shield is a great device, especially if you have surges, exposure to lightning, that sort of thing. It protects your whole house or your whole car or your whole solar array. Find out more at empshield.com. If you use the coupon code LFTN, you get $50 off each device. Our second sponsor of today's show is Discount Mylar Bags. Discount Mylar Bags is one of us. He has been in the network from before I even knew that preppers were my network, right? I always knew that I would interact with freedom people and homesteaders, but I didn't realize that preppers also belong in our community until I started listening to the Survival podcast, which was something I did because he was talking about wild edible plants. Well, Toby from Discount Mylar Bags didn't think he had anything to offer to our community years ago. And he's like, I mean, I'm not awesome with a gun. I'm not like, I can't start a fire with a piece of wood and some string. I'm not really into camping. Like, what do I bring to this community? And then he realized that what he's good at is sourcing things in bulk for cheap and passing those savings on to you. Check out more at discountmylarbags.com. And if you go there on the right-hand side, he has some advice on what size bags and those sorts of things to use for long-term storage so that you get the best bang for the buck and don't end up opening a giant bag for a family of two and then having to finish the whole bag. With that, we're going to bring on our guest today, and it's Matt Williams from Knightsbridge. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nicole. Thanks so much for having me.
So it's always good to have a fellow homesteader or farmer on when we have big, exciting things happen, like bottle fed sheep. Now, have you ever bottle fed an animal?
Calves, calves,
Calves.
not
Was
sheep.
it hard to get
Mhm.
them to like accept the bottle?
It can be. It
Yeah.
can be tough.
What's the trick?
The trick is don't stop.
That's
To
what
be quite,
Tactical's doing
to
right
be
now. Like I was like, here's the
yeah,
baby, here's the bottle, have fun with that. I gotta go do a show.
right. It's
But I was
just keep trying. Give them a 10-minute breather and try
yeah,
again if they're not
yeah.
taking it. It's
Well,
persistence. It's 100% persistence.
yeah, I'm like, I bet the replacer doesn't taste as good as the mom's milk she had for the last 3 days. But yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well,
Right.
tell us, who is Matt Williams? Tell us, like, how did you get into doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm the director of intelligence at Knightsbridge Research. My background, I spent a decade in finance and financial research, mostly for some of the largest banks on Wall Street. So I spent a decent amount of time diving into not just open source, but all different types of intelligence based upon the research that we were tasked with, right? From there, I really started diving in separately into geopolitics, things of that nature that interested me a bit more. Applying the same techniques, right? The same tactics, the same techniques apply everywhere. Uh, and then came over to Knightsbridge, goodness, 6 or 7 years ago now, which is when Knightsbridge began. I was on the ground floor. I'm one of the co-founders of Knightsbridge. And we launched this company with a real emphasis on appropriate intelligence and research techniques, but we really come at everything from a nonpartisan, unbiased perspective. We believe that bias kills good analysis every time, right? So mitigating that is a huge focus of ours. And so for the last 6 or 7 years, we've focused on our private clients. We really haven't had a public facing even a public facing website, really, for most of that time. We've worked with groups like Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney's group, if you're familiar with them, the American Strategy Group, Cajun Navy for about 5 years now. Uh, the Synagogue Security Council of North America, and a lot of others that are under NDAs. So that's been our focus this entire time. We provide research services. We provide briefings for those clients on certain areas they're very focused on and interested in. We provide intelligence overwatch. During the so-called Summer of Love, we were quite busy. Event tracking for some of our clients, a lot of the unrest that was happening in the United States. And then recently, we released what we call the Global Hotspot Report, which is a 5-day-a-week report. It is a global report. We cover every continent, and we essentially go through, collect, analyze, and disseminate everything we believe to be important on those continents: war zones, risk, economic risks, things of that nature, with predictive intelligence on each piece.
So why does
And
this
so that's
relate
more,
to a homesteader?
yeah,
Sorry, I interrupted.
yeah, sure. No, you're fine. How is it related to what now? Homesteader?
Like, why would a homesteader wanna read about all this stuff? Why don't just read
Yeah,
it
sure.
out?
On a basic level, right? In order to be adequately prepared for the future, one must have some level of ability to predict that future, to understand the risks, right? But also to be able to front run those risks a bit. It's one thing to know about them; it's another thing to be able to take action, right? And that starts with awareness. If you're not particularly aware of where the global hotspots are, if you're not particularly aware of what China may be getting ready to do in Taiwan, for example, then you're not going to be ahead of the curve. You're going to be behind it. And having that awareness, properly analyzing those risks, is just critical for being out in front and being ready for whatever may come in the future. Local is the most important thing. It always has been, it always will be. But whether we like it or not, we're in a globally connected world. And there are things that could happen in Brazil that could dramatically affect a homestead in Tennessee, right? Whether we like that or not, it is the facts of the matter. And so, yeah, it's critically important. I could use an example of China and Taiwan, right? If China invades or blockades Taiwan, which they're getting ready to do in the next few years, most likely, everything changes in America almost immediately. U.S. is going to put sanctions on China. China's likely to withhold and weaponize a lot of their output. You've got a regional war. It could become a global war, especially if Japan and South Korea get involved and then drag the U.S. in essentially. You'd have a 10% hit to global GDP, right? And the thing too is that not just would this be a massive event, everyone's going to know when it starts. It's going to be plastered everywhere, right? China invades Taiwan, big deal. Suddenly the ships are not coming anymore. But if you've been looking at the indicators ahead of time, if you've seen the moves, you've seen the indicators, you've been able to make accurate predictions that this is likely to happen in a certain time frame, you can front run all of that.
So this
And
is a
you can be
great
prepared.
example. That is a great example to start with. So that could happen, has not happened yet. Indicators make it look likely.
Mm-hmm.
And the improper reaction to that is to buy 60,000 pounds of rice and beans and hide under a rock. So with that information, what would be a more reasoned action to take for somebody
Right.
based on that information?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on your individual situation, right? Does your company receive resources from China that are going to be cut off, right? Maybe your job's at risk at that point. If a lot of what your firm does comes from China or somehow connected to China or Taiwan, if you're in the semiconductor business, that's a death blow potentially, right? So you have to look at it first from kind of an employment status situation. How could that how could China and Taiwan coming to blows affect my employment? Because there will be a lot of people in America suddenly without jobs if this were to happen. And then secondly, you go to supply chain. What does a supply chain look like? Where are my personal vulnerabilities or my company's vulnerabilities to China? So you start digging into that. Stocking rice and beans is part of that. There is a lot of our food comes from China or the surrounding areas. A lot of the packaging for food comes from China. It goes on and on. We saw a small piece of that during COVID, right? Just a little bit of an indicator of what that might look like. So you can think COVID and the after effects of COVID, and then times 10. Right. So whatever you needed to do then, you would need to do now. It'd be a similar situation, just far worse, quite frankly.
Right. And that's where I was going to go next is, where have we seen something similar like this before where shipping was impacted instantly because everything was shut down? And
Right.
how long did that take to get past? What has changed since that time is some people woke up enough to realize they had to source things multiple places. Yes, you
Hmm.
can source it cheaply from China, but how about we start a factory somewhere here to build the thing that I need to do the thing, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
but the funny thing, when we talk about disasters that can happen, and whether it be related to a natural disaster or a geopolitical disaster, there are some consistent things it strikes me that are very helpful to have. And one is a savings account. Right? So, like, if you're in debt, not having the debt super helpful because then you don't have to support the debt. A savings account is very helpful. Extra skills, the ability to have to source things from multiple locations.
Hmm.
It seems to me we end up back at the same action and having a better network of people to trade with here.
Right. Yes. Critically important in any circumstance, right? Having a level of resiliency. I mean, my family and I were homesteaders for a reason, right? And a big reason we weren't homesteaders until I got into this business. And that opened my eyes to a lot of things. And we're homesteaders now, right?
It's funny how
Which
that happens, right? You're like, I'm going to be prepared. Oh no, I'm going to be a homesteader, it turns out.
right, right. Homesteading is the next level of preparedness, right?
Yeah.
It's that sustainability. Hmm.
Or at least knowing homesteaders. Like something I love that Neethi does, she does a thing called a food church out in North Carolina,
Hmm.
is she realized that she wants all of her food sourced directly from the farm so that it does not have as many additives, basically, so that it's healthier
Right.
food. And so she made relationships with all these regenerative farms and created basically a club-based grocery store. Well, what that means when supply chains break down is they're not dependent on the supply chains,
Mm.
because the kinds of farms she has tapped into are not ones taking a bunch of inputs from outside. They're rotationally grazing things. Okay.
Awesome. That's great.
Survivalizer says, in case I missed it, why is China a problem?
Why is China the problem?
A
Um,
problem.
a
No,
problem.
it says the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Generally speaking, how far back and how big do you want to go? Generally speaking, China views this as the Chinese century. Okay. China views this century, and the Chinese take a very long view, as the century where they rise to be the globe's dominant power. This is something they've been pushing for decades at this point. The moves that China has made in the 2000s, especially in the last decade or so, are designed to put China in that position of great power and are simultaneously designed to reduce the power and influence of the United States, NATO, the EU, G7, right? Anyone who might stand in their way. And so what you're seeing out of China is gray zone warfare is a term that gets thrown around a lot. What I would say, it's unrestricted gray zone warfare. So within the gray zone warfare block, China's doing everything to accomplish that goal. That means cyber attacks. That means espionage. That means infiltration of the United States in any possible way. That means elite capture. China's doing all of these things, and they're doing it quite well. And they're doing it on an increased trajectory each and every year, right? The chart's going up and to the right as far as their activities are concerned. And so for China, part of having a Chinese century is taking Taiwan, because Taiwan, they firmly believe, is their own territory, right? Taiwan, by the way, believes it's China, and China's not China, but we won't get into the weeds on that one. So all of these actions are designed to enable China to take back Taiwan, to take most, if not all, of the South China Sea, which means war with the Philippines and others, and to reduce the United States down to where it's clearly not the world's foremost power. That's why China is a significant problem for the United States going forward, right? Because all these actions are being taken. There's no indicator that China will stop their gray zone activities. I don't think China wants to fight a war against the United States. I think they believe that they can accomplish everything they want to without an open war, without a hot war, similar to how the United States took down the Soviet Union, right? China is essentially following that game plan in their own way. We could talk for several hours on this, so I'll pause there before I go into the weeds too much.
Yeah. Yes.
Hopefully that's a good answer for you, though.
Yeah. Well, Survivalizer says that makes sense. Thanks for the answer. So you definitely got done what you wanted to get done. Okay. So let's go to another scenario-based question.
Sure.
As somebody who lives here and wants to not do stupid things in stupid places with stupid people, when one hears a rumor, how do you go about verifying the rumor? Because there's a lot of not true things that just spread. And a specific rumor that has come across my desk like 19 times since Monday is terror attacks around the eclipse in April. So let's say, like, what actions do you take when you hear a rumor like that to not just react in fear, but find out, like, is it true? What does this mean? That sort of thing. How would you approach that sort of a scenario?
Sure. I mean, essentially what you're looking to do is you're looking to validate the information, right? And so the first and most immediate step is to look at the source of that information, right? Is the source valid? You can, if it's social media, which I assume is where this particular rumor is circulating around, is social media. In social media, sometimes it can be very difficult to track a rumor back to its original source. If that's possible, then great. The best thing in the world to do is to take what that source has said a significant period of time in the past and analyze that. Go back a year, go back 2 years. What predictions was this person making? And then what happened? And if you start looking through 2-year-old material on Facebook or Twitter or X, as it's now called, or even if it's a Reuters journalist, not picking on Reuters, just using it as an example, right? This person wrote a lot of things in 2021 that didn't happen. A lot of predictions failed. Then you have a pretty good idea of the validity of the source, right? That's step one. You can also look at, does this source have anything to gain by this information? Does this person look like they're making extreme predictions for monetary gain or for some type of clout? If it's on social media, it's probably both. Usually is both. You're incentivized to make claims like this, even if they turn out to be false. You have to look at the source as well. How would this source have obtained this information, right? Um, you know, Redneck Joe 88 on Twitter may say he's got a buddy, in who know in the FBI who's feeding him information, but does he really? Is it likely that that's the case? I mean, you got to think in probabilities on these things, right? What is the likelihood that this source actually was able to obtain this information? Is this legitimate or not? Once you have an idea on the source, and if the source is good enough, right, you've got them semi-trustworthy at least, then you start looking at the information itself. And you go through much the same process, right? Is this information likely to be true based on what I know about these things? A lot of times with these rumors that really get passed around, um, it's something so extreme that if it was true, you would not have heard about it, to be quite honest, right? And I would not have heard about it, right? This would be something that would be very, very obscured, right? If 9/11 Part 2 is coming, we're not going to know about it.
How many of us heard
Right.
about 9/11 before 9/11 happened?
Right. Nobody.
I'm wondering. Anybody in the comments?
I
Did you
mean,
hear about it before it happened? Did you hear that there was a nondescript threat for American travelers?
yeah, exactly. And so you go through this process, right? You have to validate the source, validate the information, and bias is a huge part of this, right? I mean, at Knightsbridge, we're very focused on mitigating bias. If you read a report that we put out and you can detect bias in it, then we failed. Completely
Mhm.
failed. But bias is huge when you start seeing rumors and when you start getting into the world of social media, because most people have significant and unmitigated bias and are either very comfortable with it or they simply haven't put in the time to understand what it is and how it should be dealt with, right? So you're reading information every time you log on, right? That's likely, very likely biased, likely for ulterior motives, or is just being spread about without any validation whatsoever. And so you're walking into a situation where there's a lot of landmines, quite frankly. And the more extreme the claim, the less likely it is to be true, right?
Mhm.
Just as a general rule of thumb.
So this one, I hear the government is saying that there may be terrorist attacks. That's the rumor that I've heard, but I
Yeah,
haven't found the source of the government saying it. That doesn't mean, but I haven't looked either. I've been dealing with
yeah. It's
life
probably.
stuff.
I mean, it could be going back to Christopher Wray testified before Congress last Thursday, I believe. He's the director of the FBI, of course. And he essentially repeated exactly what he's been saying for a long time now, that the threat of terror attacks in the United States is elevated. Sometimes he says extremely elevated, very elevated. In his testimony on Thursday, he pointed to the border as letting across folks who would likely attempt to carry out terrorist activities at some point. It might be going back to that, but again, that's not news. He's been saying that for a long time, right? So it could be an example of someone just trying to grab some eyeballs and some clicks and make a little bit of that social media money and position it as new, especially around an event like the eclipse that people are already a little on edge about. Um, that's kind of your typical social media grifter approach, to be completely honest, right? Take something that's not new, but that someone commented on, twist it around a little bit, make it more relevant to current events, and blast it out there. Yeah.
So when you come across things like this and your
Hmm.
bias is already in one direction, whether it
Hmm.
be I get mad at the government every time I hear about the government doing anything, so everything they do is bad
Right.
or whatever,
Right.
which is where I'm coming from. Um,
Hmm.
how do you go to the sort of out of bias place? Like, what can we do to cut through that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is understanding a few things. Right? One is that human beings do not handle uncertainty well. Um, because of that, we lean on bias to help us understand, or we think it helps us understand the world around us. Humans also have certain tendencies, right? You were raised a certain way, you were taught a certain thing. Maybe you went to a certain school that put certain ideas in your head, and your bias flows from that. And so everyone is biased, right? We have to understand that first. There's a lot of folks who think that they're very lightly biased, and they're probably the most biased people I know. Right? So we have to understand it's present. And then we have to understand the problem. Um, and once you understand, hey, I am biased. Now what? Well, bias leads to poor decision making. Bias colors your analysis. You may not be in a position where analysis is part of your job, right? Like it is mine. But your analysis leads you down paths in every aspect of life, right? Your analysis of a person may lead you to marry that person or not. Your analysis of a neighbor may lead you to trust them or not. And so if you're heavily biased, those decisions are going to be of poor quality many times. And that can have dramatic impacts on your life or on your company or on your family, etc. So once you're aware of it, once you have determined you're going to deal with it, the next step is to determine what types of bias you're prone to. Everyone's prone to different types. There's over 3,000 types of bias out there. So you don't want to, you can't go through all of them, but there's a few that, if you do a search online for, most common types of bias or something along those lines, you'll find a top 10 list, which is generally good enough for this type of analysis. So you may find that selection bias is huge for you. You may find that outcome bias is a big deal. You may find that cultural bias is a significant problem. And then once you've identified those, especially early on, when this is not normal, this is not natural, you go into decision making strategies that help you stay objective. So, for example, one would be sensitivity analysis, where you are analyzing your sensitivity to certain biases. You can go into techniques like creating a matrix for a very complex situation. You can intentionally seek out alternative viewpoints, right? You can try to identify multiple potential hypotheses. You can start listing evidence or arguments for your side and for the other side, right? As you're working through this exercise to try to help yourself not be quite so biased. I've taught day-long classes just on bias, and felt like I needed a week, right? So it's a very complex topic. It's a very deep topic. But what is universally true is that we're all biased. We're almost all more biased than we think we are. And our decision making based upon that is not of the quality we believe it to be in almost every case. So really and truly, if the last 2 or 3 minutes that I've been talking on this topic is the impetus for folks in your audience to say, I need to look into this more, then this has been a great and successful show, right? Because it takes a lot of soul searching, right?
Yeah.
It takes effort. It's not something you wake up one day and say, I'm not going to be biased anymore. That's just not how it works. But it's something we put a heavy emphasis on at Knightsbridge, because we don't believe that our analysis or our decision making is appropriate, adequate, or valid if bias is playing a significant role, right? And I think that should be the mindset that everyone assumes. But it's not like they teach classes on bias in school. right?
I had a
Most
teacher
folks
teach
don't have a
critical
framework
thinking
for this.
in
They
school.
barely teach critical
No,
thinking
she was
at all.
like,
Yeah.
"Nobody teaches this, so we're doing this." It was an English teacher,
Hmm.
and it was the
Great.
one of I remember it to this day, and I'm over 50 because it
Hmm.
was like, wow, I wish they would have taught this, 10 years before my senior year in high school.
Right.
Like, we should
Right.
have been doing that the whole time. Nope. Nope.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's just pervasive, right? And you know, back to what you're talking about rumors. Bias plays a huge role in those things, especially on social media, because you often have folks who have these massive follower counts on Instagram or Twitter or wherever, and they've gotten those huge follower counts by essentially displaying their bias to everyone else who has the same bias, right? And it's groupthink, it's echo chamber type stuff. But if you're hitting on certain biases that are extraordinarily common, you're coming at it from a certain political viewpoint, perhaps, you can attract 1 million people fairly quickly who are comforted by your bias because it's the same as their bias, right? And that's what leads to rumors, especially, and just bad information in general getting amplified over and over and over. And this isn't a left problem or a right problem; it's a human problem, right? Uh,
It's human
it's
nature.
it definitely is human nature, right? This is we're just wired certain ways, and so breaking out of that is difficult, but absolutely can be done. I've got a team of about 30 folks here in Knightsbridge who have broken out of that cycle after training, of course, and some time. So I would encourage everyone to do a deep dive into that, just because the benefits are near immediate when you start realizing where your bias is and how to mitigate that.
Yeah. We school shootings come up and explode in the media when they happen.
Yes.
And it was Columbine where I learned to do this. Columbine happened and there was all sorts of, you know, immediate immediately people coming out of the woodwork turning it into a political persuasion,
Hmm.
or and then assuming things about, backgrounds of people involved. And that was when my rule for school shootings is to wait a week to a month before I have an opinion on it.
Well, first reports are always false,
Yeah,
right?
because and then I realized, like, most things that explode like that, the information you're getting is wrong.
Hmm.
So, when you find yourself going along quickly with something like that, that's the best time to put on the brakes and say, "Okay, wait a minute."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a more recent example of that just last summer, if I remember correctly, was I don't know if you remember or not. There was an image going around of an explosion at the Pentagon,
Oh,
huge
I
columns
didn't
of
even
black
see it.
smoke,
Yeah.
that type of thing, and major media outlets were retweeting it, reposting it as various, zero hedge, on that end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. It went absolutely viral, and it was false. It was an AI generated image. Had any of those folks taken about 15 seconds to zoom
Mhm.
in on the image, they would have found there were over 40 markers. This was done by AI. Roofs that didn't connect properly, lampposts that were jagged, just things that are pretty obvious. But it's estimated that you had about 7 million people see that image before everyone started deleting that tweet,
Yeah.
which is what everyone did. Everyone went back and removed it completely. But again, if you were to be breathless about it, oh my goodness, the Pentagon's under attack again, and you start taking actions, those actions are based on poor decision making, based on the failure to validate information, and it goes from there, right? So yeah, you've got to, if anything major like that happens, you have to take a step back and analyze that appropriately before making any dramatic moves. It also goes back to what we're talking about at the very beginning of the show, that it's all the more important to be aware of what's happening in the world, to be aware of what the indicators are that a future action might be taken, so that then you can front run. Then you can be in a position, an appropriate position to deal with something catastrophic should it then happen, as opposed to it happens or it's fake, didn't happen. Everyone's reacting, you're reacting, emotions get involved, and all the decisions that follow from there are very low quality decisions, right? You want to have that awareness ahead of time and be proactive, not reactive. And 99% of people are reactive, right? That's one of the things we're trying to provide at Knightsbridge is that proactive approach where here's what's happening in the world, here's the potential risk to you, and here's what you may or may not need to do about it. But if you see these three indicators, here's the next likely step, right? Trying to kind of break through that cycle a little bit, as much as we can, anyway.
Yeah, it's always as much as we can, right? So what does a
Absolutely.
person do with that information? Like
Mhm.
you get it, what do you do?
It totally depends on what the information is and what its value is to you, right? If you get information, if you see indicators, for example, that Israel's about to go into Rafah, right, in southern Gaza, which is a big deal, and it's very, very likely to happen soon. And, Lebanon is where Hezbollah is based. Hezbollah has about 500,000 rockets, and Hezbollah has repeatedly warned that they're going to fire rockets into Israel if or when they go into Rafah on a major scale. Well, if you have, family in Israel, or your company's headquarters are in Israel, for example, central Israel, moderately safe, normally, that kind of thing. But you start seeing the IDF stacking up essentially near Rafah. You start seeing ground forces consolidating, getting ready to go in. You start seeing action in Lebanon, that indicates that Hezbollah's getting ready as well. Then maybe those are indicators that, hey, you need to contact your family, get them out of there. Maybe it's indicators that your company might be in trouble very soon, right? These are indicators that you can act upon, but the actions are always extraordinarily based upon you or your company, and the potential impacts there. So it's going to be completely different, scenario by scenario. Hopefully that example is helpful.
Yeah. Well, I know back in 2020, before shutdown started happening,
Hmm.
because I used to work in public policy, I had connections in the federal government and at state level legislatures.
Hmm.
So I knew it was likely to happen before it happened because they were communicating there's going to be shutdowns, there's going to be supply shortages,
Hmm.
and this is why. And they were kind of freaking out when they were communicating that. But at the same time, because I could see the wave coming, and I went into it originally, I went into it wondering why we were reacting so strongly to this illness
Hmm.
and making fun of it actually. And and then I started getting these reports, and I'm like, man, it doesn't matter if this illness really is as deadly as they're saying it is. I can say all day long, I don't think it's that deadly. But if the reaction from our people assumes that it is, and then we start doing shutdowns, what we need to do is make sure we're ready for that because I can't control
Right.
that. Right.
Right.
Um, so that's where, you never know when the thing is going to start hitting here. But
Hmm.
then also locally things happen that you need to be aware of. So how do
Yeah,
you
and
help people connect with like the hyper local?
I mean, it's rarely the event itself, right? It's the second and third and fourth order effects that'll get you, right? And so, one of the things that let me back up. You asked, how do you help people on a local level? As far as local individuals, local companies, local organizations are concerned, right? You more or less need to be setting up your own open source intelligence collection efforts, right? Because open source is out there. It's publicly available information. It's usually fairly easy to acquire. The difficulty with open source information that you can use locally is generally that there is too much of it, and the verification is difficult. But you can do things locally, like, for example, you can set up Google Alerts, which is super straightforward. You get an email every day around the search terms you put in. And it's local news. Maybe it's your local sheriff's department or something along those lines where you get everything. Being plugged in with the folks in the area, Facebook groups, signal groups, whatever kinds of groups are there, that's super helpful, where you can have a global perspective. You can see what's happening in Brazil, for example, right? Say Brazil, which is a massive corn producer, says, "Hey, we're not going to export corn as much anymore. We're gonna reduce our exports by 50% for whatever reason." And you're in Nebraska or Iowa. Well, it's good for you to know that. That's going to have a major impact on your local environment, on your local communities, right? Where then you can be the one to alert others to that, and you know what that means for your local community, right? So everything is local as far as what directly affects you, but it wasn't local before that. It
Yeah.
was national or global before it became local.
It's super
So it's
helpful to
both.
know what local characteristics you have too, like corn in
Mhm.
Nebraska. Or
Yes.
I'm in a very rural county, and a very high percentage of employment here is government or school system jobs.
Mhm.
So, if let's just say the school system goes out of business, quote unquote, for
Mhm.
whatever reason, that's going to have a huge impact here because that's what's paying people, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
or if your county is the prison for that state and you have a lot of employment related to prison activities, and
Mhm.
then drugs get legalized, there's less
Right.
prisoners, less need for guards, like all of that goes away. And don't think that
Mhm.
doesn't play into keeping drugs illegal, guys, because I'm sure
Right.
it does. But like knowing those characteristics, I think hyper locally requires you going out to find them yourself, and
It
then think
does.
about like what does that mean for our community when changes happen?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, you have to be a student of your local area to then be able to know what the effects are of global
Mhm,
or regional events, right? I would advise everyone to. There's a website, it's city-data.com.
mhm.
And if you've never heard of it, go take a look. After this is over, of course. Go take a look,
Putting it
because you'll
in
be
comments.
shocked at the level of information down to, your city, your county level,
I bet
right?
it's spelled
Uh,
correctly though, instead of how I just spelled it.
It's with a Y,
Yeah.
but yeah, city-data.com. Super, super good
I was
resource. I
I was
mean,
thinking of Citibank right then. That's what was
oh
happening in
yeah,
my head.
yeah,
Yeah. There's
slightly different, but
the narrator in my head was confused for a second. Yeah.
all good. Like, take a look at that, right? Even on a basic level, take a look at that and start understanding who are those major employers, right? What industry dominates in your area? What do the demographic breakdowns look like? You can search by income levels, by almost anything you can think of, right, on that
Mhm.
website, and it's a great resource to at least begin laying some groundwork. Because you may have lived in one place for 30 or 40 years, but that doesn't mean you fully explored that area. That doesn't mean you fully understand the demographics and where the gangs operate and exactly who is the fourth largest employer, right? And those are
Right.
all very valuable things to know so that you can apply what you're learning and what you're seeing, elsewhere.
Cool. Okay, so you guys have some products and services that can help us with this, right?
We do.
What does
Yes,
that look like?
sure. Well, on the private client side, we provide a wide variety of research services. I won't get too deep into that. You can see it on our website. Knightsbridge.ltd is our website, as you can see in my description here as well. You can take a look at that if you're a company or a firm. For the
Yeah.
public, we've more recently begun releasing the Global Hotspot Report and the Global Hotspot Briefing. It's a subscription based service. Um, I apologize, but we do not work for free. It's
What?
inexpensive.
Oh
It's
my goodness.
inexpensive and affordable for what you
Yeah.
get. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
It's an excellent value. But we put out the report 5 days a week. We cover the global economy, the United States. Our categories are global economy, United States, Indo-Pacific, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, Middle East, Latin America, Africa, and Canada.
Hmm.
Now, not all of those make it into every report. Canada doesn't often make it into the report. Sorry, Canadians. Not a lot of geopolitically relevant news coming out of Canada these days. But for all of those categories, we're monitoring those every day. We're scraping up, we're collecting, we're analyzing, and then we're distilling what matters into that report from a nonpartisan, unbiased perspective, right? So you do get these early indicators of what may be coming down the pipeline. And we provide, everything is ICA. It's information, it's context, it's analysis. We're not just giving you the information, we're giving you the context around it, and then our analysis of where this might be going.
Hmm.
Not what has happened in the past, where's this going in the future?
Hmm.
And, accuracy rate, not to toot our own horn, is well north of 90% on our predictive analysis. And so that's what we provide, to the public. It's the global hotspot report. So if there's a particular issue in central Colorado, we may not touch on that. But for example, in the United States, when there were attacks on substations in North Carolina, we were covering that very closely.
Hmm.
When a train derailed in Ohio, that was very unusual. We covered that quite closely. We're covering the situation on the southern border very closely. There was a hypersonic missile test out in the Pacific conducted by the Air Force a couple of days ago. We're covering that, right? So we're covering what matters on a little bit of a larger scale to give you early indicators of what might happen next that could have serious implications, right?
Hmm.
So that's us, Knightsbridge.ltd. If you're interested in checking out those services, if your listeners put in LFTN as a coupon code, we'll give them a free month. It's no strings attached. It's a free month. If you like it, great. If not, shoot us an email. Let us know why not, because we'd like to improve. Right.
Yeah. So this is a very savvy way when you have a subscription-based service like these guys do to get people to use it is to provide the value so they can decide if it's worth the subscription fee. So that coupon code is LFTN, and you go to knightsbridge.ltd. I will have that link in the show notes as well for the audio podcast listeners. Anything else you want to say before we sign off? We're getting kind of close to the top of the hour here.
Yeah,
I'm going to go bottle feed some sheep some more.
Well, that sounds like all kinds of fun.
It is.
Right.
We have a free webinar tonight I got to be ready for too. So yeah.
Awesome. Well,
she may be on the webinar with me.
Hey, that's interesting, right? That's adding value right there.
Yeah.
I'll guess I'll conclude with this, right? Doom scrolling social media, even if you like the sources, watching mainstream media, reading mainstream media, there is a level of value to all of that. I think social media is extremely valuable. It allows people to exercise their rights of free speech. I don't think social media should be curtailed in any way, right? If you can say it physically, you should be able to say it online. And it's valuable. It's very valuable. At the same time, be careful, because everyone has an agenda, right? Everyone's got an agenda, whether you can pick up on it or not, right? So be very careful. Attempt to validate sources first and then information. If you can build a well-curated feed for yourself that only consists of trusted sources, you're ahead of virtually everyone else. You really are. But it takes work, right? You've got to be willing to do it. Quite frankly, if it's worth your time to read, it's worth your time to validate. And I would encourage everyone to do additional research yourself to get really, really good at that. And it'll improve your decision making. It'll improve your quality of life. You won't fall for the hoaxes anymore. Overall, there's kind of no downside, right, to going down that path. So hopefully this is a message that provides some impetus for folks to go out and do that.
Yeah, hopefully we can get you up here to do a class at some point too, because I think some sessions at SRF or something would be really it would be a very valuable add.
I've done them all over the country, so it's
awesome.
on the table if need be.
Okay. Well, Matt, I want to thank you for making time to talk to us. Guys, this is so I had a friend who went away for 2 years and came back, and he went away fall of 2019 and came back 2022, having not seen any media, any news at all where he was. And his first complaint is that Google doesn't work anymore. And what he meant by that is when he wanted to find information or validate information, Google didn't work anymore. It just brought fluff and crap up to the top of the search. And it became very hard for him to find what he needed to find. That's why services like this exist. And, there is no downside to giving it a try for a month. I don't usually like push hard on stuff like this, but I'm going to sign up because I'm not signed up and I really should be. And I should read more about that because I have been in this constant state of frustration about Google not working anymore and search not working. I've tried many different search things and then having to go out to individual sources and find stuff, which is an enormous pain in the neck. So pretty excited that your service exists. And thanks for being on the show, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Sure. All right, folks, that was awesome. We're going to sign off and get ready to go into our evening tonight. If you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, know that my hidden agenda is not hidden at all. I've got a free webinar series going on tonight, selfreliancefestival.com/webinar. And the purpose of that is to get more of you off your duffs and to the Self-Reliance Festival or get digital passes because it can change your life. It can help you make connections like Matt and like everybody that you see in the chat today. And those things are what help us go to the out of the box place and make decisions from a reasoned standpoint that make our lives better, whether or not the bad things happen. Also, definitely check out Knightsbridge.com. Use the coupon code LFTN if you want to check out his service. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.